Hey there, and welcome to Crime for Sleep. I know you're having trouble falling asleep, so let me keep you company with true crime stories from around the world. Before we dive in, I'm curious, where did you first hear this one? If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Now get comfortable, and let's get into tonight's case. Story 1. The control room panels indicated all systems were operational at 400 hours. Routine examination of surveillance footage displayed uninterrupted sequences until a brief lapse at 2:33 hours. Upon inspection, all equipment gauges registered within normal parameters, with no visible tampering or malfunction. On-site audit of security protocols confirmed authentication logs were intact, corroborating access by personnel during standard hours only. A power fluctuation event, recorded as lasting under 5 seconds, left no traces on connected devices. Yet, the logs show an access attempt during the blackout that wasn't recorded. The fluorescent lights hum. They've always hummed, but I notice it now. That steady electric buzz that fills the spaces between thoughts, between the moments when I'm trying to remember what happened in those 5 seconds. 5 seconds shouldn't matter. People blink longer than that, but I keep coming back to it, the way you worry a loose tooth with your tongue. I remember the coffee was cold, or maybe that was another shift. The shifts blur together in this place, all artificial light and recycled air. But the coffee, yes, it was cold when I reached for it, and my hand was shaking. Why was my hand shaking? There's a scratch on monitor 3, hairline thin, running diagonal across the lower right corner. I've been staring at it for weeks now, or maybe months. Time moves differently here underground, away from windows and weather. The scratch wasn't there before, I'm certain of that, almost certain. Did you see anything unusual? That's what they asked me. Standard procedure after an incident. But what constitutes unusual when your job is watching empty corridors and sealed doors? The unusual becomes usual. The usual becomes invisible. I was alone that shift. I think I was alone. The access logs don't lie, they said. Digital footprints are more reliable than human memory, but I remember the sound of footsteps in the corridor outside the control room, soft-soled shoes on polished concrete, the kind of sound that makes you look up from your screens, even when you know no one should be there. My reflection in the dark monitors looks older than I remember. When did these lines appear around my eyes? When did my hair start thinning at the temples? The cameras see everything except what matters. They record the surface of things, the movement of bodies through space, but they miss the weight of intention, the texture of fear. There's a protocol for everything here. Protocols for emergencies, for maintenance, for shift changes. But there's no protocol for forgetting. No manual for when your own memory becomes unreliable evidence. I keep finding myself in the bathroom washing my hands. The water runs clear and cold, and I scrub until my skin turns red. There's something under my fingernails, or there was something, or I think there should be something. The soap dispenser is motion activated, but sometimes it doesn't respond to my presence. Sometimes I have to wave my hands several times before it acknowledges I'm there. The power fluctuation. 5 seconds of darkness in a facility that never sleeps. 5 seconds when the cameras stopped recording, when the locks defaulted to secure, when the emergency lighting should have activated but didn't. I was here. I know I was here. But what did I do in those 5 seconds? My supervisor has kind eyes, had kind eyes. She's still my supervisor, still asks the same questions with the same concerned expression. But something changed after that shift. The way she looks at me now, like she's trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. Memory can be unreliable under stress, she said, or someone said. The words float in my mind without context, without a face attached to them. Stress. Was I stressed? The job is routine. Boring even. Watch the screens, log the incidents, follow the protocols. Nothing stressful about that. But I remember being afraid. The access card feels heavier in my pocket now. Magnetic strip worn smooth from countless swipes, plastic edges rounded from nervous handling. I catch myself checking for it obsessively, patting my pocket to confirm it's still there. What would happen if I lost it? What doors would remain closed to me? There's a photograph on my desk, a woman with dark hair and a patient smile. She looks familiar, but I can't place her. Wife, sister, friend, the frame is silver-plated, tarnished at the edges. When did I put it there? When did I forget who she is? The corridor outside the control room stretches in both directions, disappearing into shadows that the security lighting can't quite penetrate. I've walked that corridor thousands of times, but lately it feels longer. The distances between doorways seem to expand when I'm not looking directly at them. Door 17 is different from the others, heavier. The lock mechanism makes a different sound when it cycles, deeper, more final. I've never been inside door 17. My clearance level doesn't extend that far, but sometimes I dream about what's behind it, and in those dreams I have the key. The incident report was filed in triplicate, standard procedure, but I can't remember writing it. My signature is there, my employee number, my account of events, but the handwriting looks forced, unnatural, like someone was trying very hard to write like me. System integrity maintained throughout the event. That's what the report says. But systems aren't just machines and software. People are part of the system too, and people can malfunction in ways that don't show up on diagnostic screens. I've started leaving myself notes, reminders on sticky paper attached to my monitor, my desk, my locker. But the notes are written in my handwriting and I don't remember writing them. Check the logs again. Trust no one. Remember the sound. What sound? What was I supposed to remember? The cafeteria serves the same food every cycle. Rotation of predetermined meals designed for optimal nutrition and minimal waste. But lately everything tastes like metal, like I'm chewing on copper pennies or sucking on old batteries. The other staff members don't seem to notice. They eat and laugh and complain about mundane things while I push food around my plate and wonder why my mouth tastes like fear. There's a mirror in the men's room, third stall from the left. It's positioned at an odd angle, reflecting not your face but your hands as you wash them. I've been studying my hands in that mirror, looking for signs of what they might have done in those 5 seconds of darkness. But hands lie just as well as memories do. The security footage from that shift exists. I've watched it dozens of times, studying every frame, every shadow, every reflection. But the footage shows only what the cameras were programmed to see, and for 5 seconds they saw nothing at all. My replacement arrives punctually every shift change. Professional, competent, unremarkable, but she never makes eye contact anymore. She nods, accepts the logbook, settles into the chair that's still warm from my body heat, but she doesn't look at me directly, as if looking might be contagious. There's something in my locker that doesn't belong to me. A small object wrapped in tissue paper, pushed to the back behind my spare uniform. I know it's there because I can feel its presence like a splinter under the skin, but every time I reach for it, I lose my nerve. Some things are better left undiscovered. The 5 seconds replay in my mind like a broken loop, power fluctuation, darkness, silence, then light returning, systems resuming, the world continuing as if nothing had happened, but something did happen. Something changed in those 5 seconds, and I was the only witness. Or was I? The access attempt during the blackout appears in the logs like a ghost signature. No corresponding entry, no exit, no identification. Someone tried to get in or someone tried to get out, and the system recorded the attempt but not the identity. Like the building itself was trying to remember something it had been programmed to forget. I find myself standing in front of door 17 more often now, just standing there looking at the unmarked surface, listening to the silence beyond. What requires that level of security? What needs to be kept so carefully separated from the rest of us? The fluorescent lights flicker sometimes, not a malfunction, just the natural aging of the bulbs. But each flicker reminds me of that moment when everything went dark. 5 seconds of possibility. 5 seconds when anything could have happened. My hands are clean now. I've washed them so many times the skin is raw, but they feel clean. Whatever was under my fingernails is gone. Whatever I touched in those 5 seconds has been scrubbed away. But the memory of touching something remains like phantom pain in an amputated limb. The woman in the photograph is smiling, but her eyes look sad. Or maybe that's just the way the light hits the glass. Light can be deceptive. It shows you what's there, but it also creates shadows, hides things, makes you see patterns that don't exist. I dream about the control room now. In the dreams, all the monitors show the same image, my own face staring back at me from every screen, but the expression is wrong. The person on the monitors knows something that I don't. The person on the monitors remembers what happened in those 5 seconds. The scratch on monitor 3 is growing, spreading like a crack in ice, following stress patterns invisible to the naked eye. Soon it will reach the edges of the screen, and then what? Will the whole thing shatter? Will the images fragment into pieces too small to understand? But maybe that's what I want. Maybe fragmentation is easier than clarity. Maybe some truths are too sharp to handle intact. The fluorescent lights hum their electric lullaby, and I listen for variations in the tone, for messages hidden in the frequency. The building is trying to tell me something. The systems are trying to remember what they were forced to forget. And in 5 seconds of darkness, in the space between one breath and the next, I think I'm finally ready to listen. Story 2. The surveillance footage starts at 0200, showing an undisturbed hallway leading to room 4B upon entering. The room's overall arrangement displays adherence to typical housekeeping standards: bed linens taut, furniture aligned, and curtains drawn. The air conditioning is active, maintaining a consistent low temperature. No items appear displaced. However, the closet door remains partially open, absent any indications of interference. The digital clock beside the bed blinks 12:00 continuously, despite the room's electricity operating without interruption. A single suitcase rests in the corner, unzipped but still packed, suggesting imminent departure that never transpired. There is no sign of occupant presence or return, although the guest book confirms recent check-in. The window latch is intact, yet the window itself is ajar. I remember the sound first, that mechanical hum of the ice machine down the hall. It cycled every 17 minutes. I counted. I had been counting for hours before I realized I was doing it. The carpet beneath my feet was that industrial kind, meant to hide stains, burgundy with gold flecks. I stared at it while the manager explained what they had found, or rather what they hadn't found. She had checked in with cash. I remember thinking that was unusual, but not impossible. People still did that sometimes, preferred the anonymity, the privacy. I understood that impulse. The room key was still at the front desk, never picked up, but someone had been in the room. The suitcase proved that. personal items arranged with a peculiar care that housekeeping never bothered with, a book folded open to page 47, reading glasses placed just so on the nightstand. I keep thinking about the window, how it was open exactly 3 inches, not 2, not 4, 3, as if someone had measured. The ice machine hums again. I'm back in my own room now, but the sound carries through these thin walls. I wonder if she heard it too, if she counted the cycles like I do. There was a receipt in the suitcase, coffee shop 2 blocks away. The timestamp showed purchase after the supposed check-in, but before anyone saw her in the hallway. I walked there later. The barista remembered making a large coffee, black, no sugar, but couldn't recall the face that ordered it. Memory is unreliable, I know this. I've seen how witnesses construct stories that feel true but aren't. How the mind fills gaps with logic that seems sound until you examine it closely. The manager asked if I thought she had left voluntarily. I said I didn't know. That was honest. I don't know anything for certain anymore. I've been staying in hotels for 3 weeks now, following the case, they think, following leads, but really I'm trying to understand something about transient spaces, how they hold echoes of people who pass through, how they reveal and conceal simultaneously. Room 4B smelled like lavender. Housekeeping uses an industrial cleaner that's supposed to be odorless, but underneath that lavender, as if someone had brought their own scent, their own sense of home to a place designed to be temporary. The coffee shop receipt bothers me more than it should, not because it's evidence of her presence, but because of what she ordered. Black coffee, no sugar. I drink my coffee the same way. Have for years. It's a small thing, meaningless, but it sits in my mind like a splinter. I think about the suitcase often, how it was packed with such intention. Clothes folded in a specific way, toiletries arranged by size, everything suggesting someone who planned carefully, who thought ahead. But then why leave the window open? Why disappear before picking up the room key? The surveillance footage shows the hallway but not the room itself. Privacy laws, the manager explained. Guests expect certain protections. I wondered what other protections had failed. There was a notepad by the phone, hotel stationery. One sheet had been removed but carefully. No impression left on the page beneath. Whoever took it knew about such things. Knew that pressure leaves marks, that paper holds secrets. I've started opening my own hotel windows 3 inches. I tell myself it's research, understanding the mindset, but late at night, when the ice machine cycles and the air conditioning hums, I wonder if I'm looking for something else. Some connection to a stranger who might not be a stranger at all. The coffee tastes different in each city. Same order, black, no sugar, but the water changes everything. The altitude, the minerals. I think she would have noticed these variations too. Someone who packed so carefully would pay attention to details. Room 4B has been cleaned and rented again. The manager mentioned this casually, as if it should close something in my mind, but I know the lavender smell lingers. Some traces can't be erased by industrial cleaners and fresh linens. I found the coffee shop receipt in my own jacket pocket yesterday. Not hers, mine. From 3 weeks ago, before I ever heard about room 4B, before I knew about missing persons and open windows and ice machines that cycle every 17 minutes. The timestamp matches perfectly. Large coffee, black, no sugar. I remember ordering it now. Remember the barista's tired smile. Remember walking back to my hotel, which wasn't the same hotel but looked identical. Same burgundy carpet, same mechanical sounds. Memory is unreliable, I know this, but physical evidence should be solid. Receipts don't lie. Timestamps don't shift. Yet here I am, holding proof of my presence in a place I'm certain I'd never been at a time that makes no sense. The window in my current room is open 3 inches. I don't remember opening it, but I must have, just like I must have bought that coffee. Just like I must have some reason for following a case that feels more like following myself through a maze of identical rooms and industrial carpets. The lavender scent is stronger tonight. I check the housekeeping supplies. Odorless cleaner as expected, but the smell persists, familiar now, comforting almost. I think about the suitcase again, how it was packed with such care, how the clothes were folded in a way that seemed familiar, how the toiletries were arranged exactly as I arrange mine when I travel, by size, by frequency of use, by logic that makes sense only to the person doing the arranging. The ice machine cycles, 17 minutes, always 17 minutes. I wonder if this is normal or if I've been staying in hotels long enough to notice patterns that were always there. Background sounds that become foreground when you listen carefully enough. Room 4B is 3 floors below mine. I could walk down there, ask to see it again, but I'm afraid of what I might recognize. What might feel too familiar in a space I'm supposed to be investigating rather than inhabiting. The coffee shop barista has started to remember me, asks if I want the usual. Large coffee, black, no sugar. I nod because it's easier than explaining that I don't remember establishing a usual. That time seems to fold back on itself in ways that make linear thinking impossible. There's a notepad by my phone, hotel stationery. I've been writing on it without realizing. Notes about the case, about timelines that don't align, about evidence that points in circles rather than toward conclusions. One sheet is missing, removed carefully with no impression left on the page beneath. I must have taken it, must have had a reason, but I can't remember what I wrote or why it needed to be hidden. The window is still open 3 inches. The lavender scent still lingers. The ice machine still cycles every 17 minutes, and I still count without meaning to. I think I understand now why she never picked up the room key, why the suitcase was packed but never unpacked, why the window was open exactly 3 inches. Some departures happen before arrival. Some disappearances are discoveries of what was already gone. The surveillance footage shows an undisturbed hallway, and I believe that's accurate. Nothing was disturbed because nothing was ever really there to disturb. The coffee is getting cold in my hands, black and bitter, and somewhere 3 floors below, a digital clock blinks 12:00 in a room that smells like lavender and holds the echo of someone who might have been me. Story 3. The front door didn't resist. My fingers grazed the keyhole, expecting the familiar struggle of metal against metal, but it turned without catching. The hallway, usually bustling with creaks and groans, stood silent as I stepped inside. My footsteps should have echoed, filled the empty space, yet they fell flat, swallowed by the shadows. I paused, straining to hear anything, a sigh of wind, the murmur of ancient wood, but the quiet was absolute, oppressive. I reached toward the light switch, hesitated, half expecting the touch to dissolve against my fingertips like a mirage. The nausea sits in my throat like a stone. It's been there for days now, maybe weeks. Time moves differently when you can't trust your own memory, when each moment bleeds into the next like watercolors in rain. I swallow, but the sensation remains, that familiar weight pressing against my windpipe, making each breath a conscious effort. I remember the smell first, always the smell, sweet and cloying like overripe fruit left too long in summer heat. It clung to my clothes, my hair, my skin. Even now, washing my hands at the kitchen sink, I catch traces of it beneath the soap's artificial lavender. The water runs cold, then scalding, but my fingers remain numb. The house breathes around me, walls expanding and contracting with each gust of wind outside. Or maybe it's my imagination. Everything feels uncertain now, as if the foundation itself has shifted beneath my feet. I lean against the counter, watching water droplets fall from my fingertips onto the ceramic surface. Each drop creates perfect circles that expand outward before disappearing entirely. There was a phone call. I think there was a phone call. The receiver felt heavy in my hand, heavier than it should have been, and the voice on the other end sounded distant, distorted, like speaking through water or thick glass. The words themselves escape me now, but the tone remains, urgent and pleading, then abruptly silent. The dial tone that followed seemed to last forever. My reflection in the kitchen window shows a stranger's face. Hollow cheeks, dark circles beneath eyes that don't quite focus. When did I start looking so pale, so translucent? I touch the glass and my reflection touches back, but there's a delay, a fraction of a second where our movements don't align. I step away quickly. The basement door stands slightly ajar. I don't remember opening it. The darkness beyond seems to pulse with its own rhythm, breathing in and out like a living thing. My feet carry me toward it without conscious decision, each step deliberate yet dreamlike. The wooden stairs creak under my weight, a sound that should be comforting but instead sends shivers up my spine. There were flowers once, yellow ones with petals soft as tissue paper. I held them in my hands, watching as they wilted in real time, their bright color fading to brown at the edges. Someone had given them to me, but I can't recall who or why. They smelled of earth and decay, even when fresh. I threw them away but found them again later, sitting in a vase on the kitchen table as if they'd never been discarded. The basement air tastes metallic, copper pennies and rust filling my mouth with each inhale. I fumble for the light switch, my fingers dancing across rough concrete until they find the familiar plastic rectangle. The bulb flickers once, twice, then holds steady, casting everything in harsh yellow light that creates more shadows than it eliminates. I see the chair first, wooden, straight-backed, positioned in the center of the room like a throne or an altar. The seat is worn smooth by years of use, and there are scratches along the arms that I don't remember making. Or maybe I do remember. Memory has become unreliable, a broken film reel that skips and stutters, showing the same scenes out of order. The conversation replays in fragments, accusations and denials, voices rising and falling like ocean waves. I was sitting across from someone, but their face remains blurred, features shifting each time I try to focus. Their hands moved constantly, gesturing, pointing, sometimes reaching toward me before pulling back. I wanted to explain, to make them understand, but the words wouldn't come. My own hands shake as I examine them under the basement light. The skin looks wrong somehow, too smooth in some places, too rough in others. There's dirt under my fingernails that won't wash away no matter how hard I scrub. Black crescents that seem to grow darker each time I look. The silence upstairs feels different now, pregnant with possibility. Footsteps that might be mine, doors opening and closing without visible cause. I climb the stairs slowly, each step an effort that leaves me breathless. The kitchen looks exactly as I left it, yet somehow changed. The shadows fall at different angles, and the air tastes of something I can't identify. There's a photograph on the refrigerator that wasn't there before. Two figures standing close together, their faces obscured by sunlight or shadow. I don't recognize the location, but something about the image makes my chest tight with anxiety. I reach to remove it, but my fingers pass through the paper as if it were made of smoke. The phone rings, the sound cuts through the silence like a blade, sharp and insistent. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times before lifting the receiver. The voice on the other end is familiar yet strange, speaking words that make no sense. They ask about things I can't remember, people I might have known, places I may have been. I hang up without responding. Sleep comes in fragments now. I close my eyes and see flashes of scenes that might be memories or dreams. A room filled with mirrors, each reflection showing a different version of myself. A garden where nothing grows despite careful tending. Hands reaching from dark water, fingers grasping at air before disappearing beneath the surface. The basement calls to me again. I resist at first, but the pull grows stronger with each passing hour. When I finally descend, the chair has moved, just slightly, perhaps an inch or two, but enough to notice. The scratches on the arms seem deeper, more pronounced. I run my fingers along the worn wood and feel the grooves match perfectly with my grip. Someone was here, someone sat in this chair while I watched, while I waited. Their breathing was labored, uneven, and their eyes never left my face. They spoke in whispers that I had to strain to hear, confessing things that made my stomach churn. Or maybe I was the one speaking, the words pouring out like water from a broken dam. The smell returned stronger now, overwhelming the basement's musty air. Sweet decay and something else, something organic and wrong. I search for the source but find nothing obvious. The scent seems to emanate from the walls themselves, seeping through concrete and wood like a living thing. My reflection in the basement's small window shows someone I don't recognize. The face is mine but altered, features rearranged in subtle ways that create an uncanny valley effect. The eyes are too bright, too knowing. The mouth curves in a smile I didn't make. I step away from the window, but the reflection remains, watching me with interest. There was an argument, voices raised in anger, accusations flying like arrows. Someone stood too close, their breath hot against my face as they spoke words designed to wound. I wanted to step back, but found myself frozen, unable to move or respond. The world tilted sideways, and suddenly I was looking down from a great height, watching the scene unfold like a play performed for my benefit. The kitchen faucet drips steadily, each drop marking time in a rhythm that matches my heartbeat. I count the drops, lose track, start again. The sound echoes through the house, bouncing off walls and ceiling until it becomes a symphony of percussion. I turn the handle tighter, but the dripping continues, relentless and hypnotic. My clothes feel wrong against my skin, too tight in some places, too loose in others. The fabric scratches and clings, making me constantly aware of my body's boundaries. I change into different clothes, but the sensation remains. It's as if my skin itself has changed, become foreign and uncomfortable. The chair waits for me in the basement. I sit without thinking, feeling the wood conform to my body like it was carved specifically for me. The scratches under my fingers tell a story I can't quite read, a narrative written in grooves and gouges. I close my eyes and let the darkness wash over me. Fragments surface like bubbles in dark water, a hand reaching toward me, fingers splayed wide, a voice calling my name from far away. The taste of copper filling my mouth, the sensation of falling, though I never hit the ground. Each memory arrives complete but disconnected, puzzle pieces that don't fit together no matter how I arrange them. The photograph on the refrigerator has changed again. Now it shows a single figure standing alone, their shadow stretching impossibly long across barren ground. I study the image, searching for clues, but the details shift each time I look away and back. Sometimes the figure faces toward me, sometimes away. Sometimes there's no figure at all, just empty landscape under an overcast sky. Someone knocks at the front door, 3 sharp raps that echo through the house like gunshots. I freeze listening, but the sound doesn't repeat. When I peer through the window, I see no one. The The street lies empty, bathed in the pale light that could be dawn or dusk. Time has lost all meaning, each moment stretching into infinity or compressing into nothing. The basement door swings open on its own. I watch from the kitchen as it moves slowly, deliberately, revealing the darkness beyond. No wind stirs the air, no vibration shakes the house. The door simply opens as if pulled by invisible hands. I approach cautiously, my footsteps loud in the silence. The chair sits empty, but I can feel a presence lingering around it. The air shimmers slightly, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. I reach out and my fingers encounter resistance, as if someone invisible occupies the space. The sensation makes my skin crawl, but I can't pull away. Words echo in my memory, spoken in a voice that might be mine. Promises and threats, confessions and lies, all jumbled together until meaning dissolves into pure sound. I try to separate the voices, to identify who said what, but they blend and merge until only emotional resonance remains. Fear and anger, desperation and resolve, love and hatred intertwined. The smell grows stronger, more insistent. It follows me through the house now, clinging to my clothes and hair like smoke. I open windows, but no breeze stirs the curtains. The air remains still and heavy, pressing against me with almost physical weight. Each breath requires effort, as if the atmosphere itself has thickened. My hands move without conscious direction, touching surfaces and objects with careful precision. The kitchen counter, smooth and cold, the window glass vibrating slightly with each gust of wind outside, the basement doorknob, warm as if recently grasped by other fingers. Each texture tells a story I'm not sure I want to understand. The phone rings again, but when I answer, only silence greets me. Not even the whisper of breath or distant background noise, just perfect, absolute quiet that stretches on until I hang up. The silence feels accusatory, pregnant with unspoken words and unasked questions. I unplug the phone, but somehow it continues to ring. Shadows move independently of their sources, sliding across walls and ceiling with liquid grace. I follow their movement with my eyes, trying to predict their paths, but they change direction without warning. Sometimes they seem to pause, hovering in place as if aware of my attention, before continuing their mysterious dance. The basement beckons again. I resist, but my feet carry me downward despite my reluctance. The chair waits, patient and knowing, its wooden surface gleaming under the harsh electric light. I sit and feel the familiar grooves under my palms, the worn smoothness of the seat beneath me. The basement walls seem to lean inward, creating a cocoon of concrete and shadow. Memory fragments swirl like leaves in wind, a face twisted with emotion, mouth open in a scream or shout, hands grasping desperately at air. The sensation of weight, sudden and overwhelming. The sound of something heavy hitting the floor. Each image arrives sharp and clear before dissolving into uncertainty. I close my eyes and feel the chair's arms under my grip, solid and real. When I open them again, the basement has changed. The walls seem closer, the ceiling lower. The single bulb swings gently, casting moving shadows that dance across every surface. I try to stand, but my body won't respond. My hands remain locked around the chair's arms as if fused to the wood. The truth hovers just beyond comprehension, a shape glimpsed from the corner of my eye that vanishes when I turn to look directly. I know something happened in this basement, in this chair, but the details remain frustratingly elusive. The harder I try to remember, the more the memories fragment and scatter. Time moves strangely here. Minutes might be hours, hours might be seconds. The electric bulb flickers in a rhythm that seems almost like Morse code, but I can't decipher the message. The basement air grows thicker, more oppressive, until each breath becomes a conscious struggle. My reflection in the basement window has changed again. Now it shows someone I almost recognize, features familiar yet wrong. The eyes hold knowledge I don't possess, and the mouth moves as if speaking words I can't hear. I want to look away but find myself trapped by my own gaze, locked in a staring contest with this other self. The chair creaks softly as I shift my weight, wood protesting against wood in a voice that sounds almost human. The scratches under my fingers pulse with warmth, as if blood still flows through the carved channels. I trace their patterns obsessively, following each groove to its end before starting again. Somewhere above, the house settles into night or day. The quality of light filtering down through the basement window changes subtly, but I can't tell if it's growing brighter or darker. Time has become fluid, meaningless, a river that flows in all directions at once. The photograph upstairs haunts my thoughts. Two figures, then one, then none, each iteration revealing less while somehow suggesting more. I want to climb the stairs and examine it again, but my body remains anchored to this wooden throne, held fast by invisible chains of memory and guilt. The basement walls begin to breathe, expanding and contracting in slow rhythm. Or perhaps it's my vision that pulses, my perception that shifts and wavers. The boundary between self and surroundings grows thin, permeable. I am the chair, the basement, the house itself. I am the memory that won't quite surface, the truth that hovers just out of reach. My fingers trace the scratches one final time, and suddenly I understand their pattern. They form letters, words, a message carved deep into the wood by desperate hands. My hands. The revelation should shock me, but instead it brings only a strange sense of completion, as if a circuit has finally closed. The basement door swings shut above, sealing me in darkness as the bulb finally dies, but I no longer need light to see. The truth glows with its own luminescence, terrible and beautiful, filling the space around me with cold fire. I sit in my chair and wait, patient as stone, for whatever comes next, story 4. The clock chimed once, though it wasn't the hour. A soft tick hung in the air, as though time itself paused mid-breath. Each morning the curtain swayed at an unfamiliar rhythm, its fabric brushing against my fingertips like a hesitant whisper. The floor, usually firm beneath my steps, now murmured with misplaced echoes, folding under the weight of uncertainty. Objects aligned to patterns I never set, like the picture frame subtly tilted to the left, its angle challenging the memory of its straightness. I reached for the glass on the counter, yet felt my hand grasp air instead, an echo of what should have been. A door closed where it shouldn't, and the air thickened with the knowledge of a cycle disrupted. The photograph stares back at me now, its edges worn from handling. I don't remember touching it so much, yet the evidence lies in my fingers. The woman in the frame wore a blue dress, or perhaps it was green. Memory shifts like water through cupped hands. She disappeared on a Tuesday, or was it Wednesday? The days blur together when you spend months turning them over in your mind, examining each hour like evidence in a case that refuses to close. The detective assigned to her file had tired eyes and coffee-stained reports. He spoke in measured tones about standard procedures and statistical probabilities. Most missing persons return within 72 hours, he said, though his pen never stopped moving across the paper. Adults have the right to disappear. But she wouldn't have left the cat. I found myself walking the same streets she walked, tracing patterns that might reveal intention. The coffee shop on the corner where she ordered the same drink every morning. Black coffee, no sugar. The barista remembered her laugh, described it as musical. I tried to recall if I'd ever noticed music in her voice, but the memory felt borrowed, unreliable. The apartment building where she lived stood like a monument to ordinary life. Brick facade, narrow windows, a front door that required more force than seemed necessary. I pressed my palm against the glass, searching for warmth that might linger from her touch. The superintendent, a man with paint-stained fingers, spoke about her in past tense, though no body had been found. "Quiet tenant," he said, keys jangling as he unlocked her door for the third time that month. "Never caused trouble, rent always on time." Inside, her belongings waited in suspended animation, books arranged by height rather than subject, a half-finished crossword puzzle on the kitchen table, pen lying beside it like an abandoned thought. The refrigerator hummed with patient persistence, preserving food that would never be consumed. I photographed everything, though I couldn't articulate why. The angle of her reading glasses on the nightstand, the way her shower curtain hung slightly askew, the single coffee cup in the sink, unwashed. Each image felt significant and meaningless simultaneously. The investigation consumed my evenings. I spread her life across my dining table like a puzzle missing crucial pieces. Bank statements showed regular deposits, modest withdrawals. Phone records revealed conversations with her sister, her dentist, a number that belonged to a florist. No mysterious contacts, no pattern of escalating fear. Her sister arrived from across the state, eyes red-rimmed and searching. We sat in the same coffee shop, ordering drinks neither of us wanted. She spoke about childhood memories, about the woman who sent birthday cards precisely on time and always remembered to ask about your health. She was planning a garden, the sister said, stirring sugar into coffee that would grow cold untouched. Bought seeds for vegetables she'd never grown before. Said she wanted to learn something new. The seeds remained in their packets, stored in a kitchen drawer between takeout menus and loose batteries. I held them sometimes, feeling the potential life contained within each small hull. Tomatoes, basil, carrots, plans that would never germinate. Weeks passed, the detective's calls became less frequent, his updates more routine. The case file grew thicker but not clearer. Witness statements that contradicted each other. Security footage that showed nothing unusual. A trail that ended at the intersection where she was last seen, walking toward a destination no one could identify. I began to dream about her, not the woman I knew, but someone wearing her face like an ill-fitting mask. In these dreams, she moved through spaces that bent and shifted, always just beyond my reach. I would wake with the taste of coffee in my mouth, though I drank tea before bed. The photograph on my counter tilted further left each morning. I straightened it repeatedly, yet it defied my efforts with quiet persistence. The frame itself seemed unchanged, but the image within shifted like a living thing. Her smile appeared different from new angles, revealing expressions I hadn't noticed before. My notes filled 3 notebooks, observations, theories, questions that spawned more questions. I wrote about the way she folded her laundry, about the books she'd borrowed from the library but never returned. Details that felt crucial in the dark hours before dawn, insignificant in daylight. The florist remembered her, an elderly woman with soil under her fingernails and a memory for faces. She described someone who asked thoughtful questions about perennials, who wanted flowers that would return year after year without replanting. She said she was tired of temporary things, the florist recalled, arranging roses with practiced efficiency, wanted something that would last. But she had chosen the most temporary act of all, disappearance without explanation, leaving behind only questions that multiplied like weeds in an untended garden. The detective closed the case after 6 months, not solved, simply filed away with hundreds of others that defied resolution. He offered words about doing everything possible, about keeping the file open for new information. His handshake felt like an ending I wasn't prepared to accept. I continued my walks through her neighborhood. The coffee shop changed ownership, the new barista unaware of the woman who once laughed like music. The apartment building remained unchanged, though a different name appeared on the mailbox for her unit. Life moved forward with relentless normalcy, filling the spaces she had occupied. Sometimes I caught glimpses of her in peripheral vision. A woman with similar hair boarding a bus, a laugh that carried the right cadence drifting from a crowded restaurant. I would turn, searching, but find only strangers living their own unremarkable lives. The photograph began to fade, not the paper itself, but something deeper. The colors seemed less vivid, the details less sharp. I considered having it restored, but hesitated. Perhaps the fading was appropriate, a visual representation of memory's natural decay. Her sister stopped calling. The florist moved to a warmer climate. The superintendent painted over the scratches on her apartment door, erasing the small imperfections that had made it uniquely hers. The world conspired to forget, to smooth over the disruption her absence had created. But I remembered the weight of the coffee cup in the sink, the specific angle of morning light through her window, the way her books leaned against each other like old friends sharing secrets. These details anchored themselves in my consciousness, refusing to fade despite the passage of time. The notebook entries became shorter, more cryptic, single words that carried the weight of entire theories, question marks that multiplied like cancer cells, consuming certainty. I wrote about shadows that fell wrong, about the sound of footsteps that stopped too abruptly, about the taste of unfinished conversations. In quiet moments, I wondered if she had simply walked away from a life that no longer fit, if the woman who wanted lasting things had chosen the most permanent escape of all. But the cat remained, patient and waiting, proof that some departures are not chosen but imposed. The clock continues to chime at impossible hours. The curtain moves to rhythms I cannot predict. Objects shift when I'm not watching, rearranging themselves according to logic I cannot grasp. The photograph tilts further each day, as though the frame itself is slowly forgetting how to hold her image upright. I understand now that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, but experienced. They become part of us, changing the way we see ordinary moments. Every empty coffee cup becomes a question. Every untended garden suggests stories that will never be told. The woman in the photograph smiles with secrets I will never know. Her disappearance created a void that cannot be filled, only inhabited. I carry her absence like a stone in my chest, smooth and heavy with the weight of unanswered questions. The investigation continues in small ways, a glance at every woman with similar hair, a pause outside coffee shops where music might hide in ordinary laughter. The search has become involuntary, a reflex that activates without conscious thought. Perhaps she exists in the spaces between certainty and doubt, in the moments when reality feels negotiable. Perhaps disappearance is not an event but a process, a gradual fading that begins long before anyone notices the absence. The notebook remains open on my desk, pages filled with fragments that refuse to form a complete picture. Words scattered like seeds in unfertile ground, waiting for conditions that may never arrive. The pen lies beside it, patient as the coffee cup in her sink, ready to record revelations that hover just beyond reach. I straighten the photograph once more, knowing it will tilt again by morning. The woman inside continues to smile, holding secrets that transform with each viewing. Her blue dress catches light that exists only in memory, or perhaps it was green after all. The clock chimes once, though it isn't the hour. Story 5. It looked like a flicker at the window, just a momentary blur bouncing against the edge of vision, yet refusing to settle into focus. I hesitated halfway across the room, a chill coursing through the air. It had no business in this place, no right to be here, yet it beckoned like an echo from a forgotten mirror. I approached the glass, drawn inexplicably, as if compelled by a force I couldn't name. The room seemed to shape-shift around me, familiar shapes twisting, as if whispering a secret only I wasn't meant to hear. No explanation came, only a gnawing certainty that I'd seen this flicker, lingering just beyond clarity once before. I should have looked away. But I didn't, my palm pressed against the cool surface, fingers spread wide like a child's handprint on fogged glass. The condensation wasn't there, but I felt it should have been. The memory of moisture, the memory of breath against windows on cold mornings when everything was different. The case file sits on my desk now, pages yellowed at the edges. I don't remember opening it today, yet there it is, splayed open to a photograph I've studied countless times. A woman's face caught mid-laugh, eyes crinkled at the corners. She had been someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's secret. I met her brother in a coffee shop that smelled of burnt beans and disappointment. He stirred his cup counterclockwise, always counterclockwise, the spoon making tiny scraping sounds against ceramic. She called me that night, he said, or maybe he said she didn't call. Memory plays tricks when you've lived with a case too long. Said she was meeting someone, or maybe she said she wasn't meeting anyone. The details blur together like watercolors in rain. I have notebooks filled with contradictions, statements that shift depending on who's remembering and when they're remembering it. Truth becomes fluid when filtered through grief and time. The flicker returns to the window. I turn from my desk, pen still in hand, ink bleeding onto my palm in a thin blue line. It moves differently now, more deliberate, less like a reflection and more like intention. I was assigned to her case after the first detective retired. Burnout, they said. Too many cold cases, too many families asking questions that had no comfortable answers. Her file landed on my desk with a soft thud, manila folder worn smooth by handling. The crime scene photos showed an apartment that looked lived in but not quite right. Furniture slightly askew, as if someone had been searching for something without wanting to appear obvious about it. A coffee cup on the counter, still half full. The coffee had been cold when they found it, but who drinks hot coffee at midnight anyway? Her neighbor, an elderly woman with hands that shook when she spoke, claimed she heard voices through the thin walls. 2 voices, maybe 3. But when pressed for details, she became vague, uncertain. Could have been the television, she admitted, wrapping a thin sweater tighter around her shoulders. I don't hear so well anymore. The building had poor insulation. Sound carried in strange ways, bouncing off pipes and settling into corners where it didn't belong. I spent an afternoon there, listening to the way conversations from other apartments bled through the walls, becoming fragments of other people's lives. The flicker moves again. This time I'm certain it's not my imagination, not the play of afternoon light through glass. It has substance, weight, purpose. I set down my pen and moved closer to the window. Her phone records showed 3 calls that night. One to her brother, lasting 47 seconds. One to a number that was disconnected by the time we tried to trace it. One to a pizza place that had been closed for 6 months. The phone company must have made an error, the technician told me, but his eyes avoided mine when he said it. Phone companies don't make those kinds of errors, not anymore, not with the systems they have in place. I called the pizza place anyway, reached a dry cleaner who'd taken over the number. The woman who answered had a voice like gravel, worn smooth by years of customer service. "People call here all the time looking for pizza," she said. "Wrong numbers, old contacts lists. Sometimes they get angry when I tell them we press shirts instead of making pepperoni." But she remembered one call that stood out. A woman's voice, scared, asking if anyone was there who could help her. Not help with pizza, just help. "I told her to call the police," the dry cleaner said, but she hung up before I could finish the sentence. The timing matched, the fear in the voice matched what I imagined her fear might have sounded like. But imagining isn't evidence, and fear sounds different to everyone who hears it. My reflection stares back from the window now, superimposed over whatever moves beyond the glass. I look older than I remember being, lines around my eyes that weren't there when this case began. Or maybe they were there and I just wasn't paying attention to mirrors. The apartment building where she lived was scheduled for demolition. I visited it one last time before the wrecking ball arrived, walked through empty hallways that still held the echo of lives once lived there. Her apartment door stood open, revealing walls marked by the ghosts of picture frames and furniture. I found something wedged behind the radiator, a piece of paper folded small and tight, like a secret someone wanted to keep but couldn't bear to destroy. The handwriting was careful, deliberate. "He knows I know, can't stay here, can't leave either. The coffee tastes wrong, everything tastes wrong. If something happens, look for the flicker." The note wasn't signed. The handwriting analysis was inconclusive. It could have been hers, could have been anyone's, could have been left by a previous tenant, unrelated to anything that mattered. But the word flicker made my skin crawl in a way I couldn't explain. The window grows colder under my palm. The flicker has stopped moving, hovering just beyond the glass like it's waiting for something. For recognition, maybe, for acknowledgement. Her brother called me last week, or maybe it was last month. Time moves strangely when you're circling the same questions without finding answers. "I keep thinking I see her," he said. His voice carried the weight of sleepless nights and unanswered prayers. In crowds, in coffee shops, reflected in windows, always just out of focus, always just beyond reach. I wanted to tell him that grief plays tricks with vision, that the mind creates what it needs to survive loss. But I'd been seeing things too, flickers of movement where there should be stillness, shadows that belonged to no visible object. The investigation stalled after 6 months. No witnesses who could agree on what they'd seen. No physical evidence that pointed to any particular conclusion. No suspects who couldn't account for their whereabouts or whose accounts made enough sense to be believed. She had simply disappeared from her apartment, leaving behind a life that looked interrupted rather than ended. Mail piling up on the counter, milk souring in the refrigerator, a book open to page 247, a passage about memory and the tricks it plays on those who trust it completely. I read that passage so many times I memorized it. We remember what we need to remember, forget what we need to forget, and sometimes confuse the two processes until we can no longer distinguish between what happened and what we wished had happened. The book belonged to the library. It was overdue by 3 weeks when we found it. The librarian, a woman with silver hair and patient eyes, said she'd been meaning to call about it. She was a regular, the librarian told me, always reading books about psychology, about the mind and how it works or stops working. She seemed to be searching for something specific, but I never asked what. The flicker presses against the window now, close enough that I can see it's not quite a reflection and not quite a shadow. It has the suggestion of a face, features that shift when I try to focus on them directly. I pull my hand away from the glass, but the cold remains on my palm, spreading up my arm like recognition. The coffee shop where I met her brother closed down last month. The space sits empty now, windows papered over with notices about new management coming soon. But I drive by sometimes, and I swear I can still smell burnt beans and disappointment seeping through the walls. Her case file grows thicker with each passing week, filled with reports that lead nowhere and witness statements that contradict each other in ways that feel almost deliberate. As if everyone involved agreed to remember the story differently, to keep the truth just out of reach. The detective who retired before me left a note in the file. Just one line, written in pencil on the back of a business card. Some cases aren't meant to be solved. Some disappearances are chosen. I wanted to call him to ask what he meant, but he'd moved across the country and changed his phone number. The forwarding address led to a post office box that had been closed for non-payment. The flicker moves away from the window, drifting toward the corner of my vision where it feels more comfortable, more natural. I don't turn to follow it. I've learned that direct observation makes it fade, while peripheral awareness allows it to linger. Her apartment has been demolished now, replaced by a parking lot that never seems to fill completely. There's always one empty space, always in the same location, as if drivers instinctively avoid that particular patch of asphalt. I parked there once just to see what it felt like. The car radio picked up strange signals, voices speaking in languages I didn't recognize, or maybe in no language at all. Just the sound of communication without meaning, connection without understanding. The meter ran out after an hour, but no ticket appeared on my windshield. The parking enforcement officer told me later that his equipment malfunctioned in that spot, that the handheld device went blank every time he tried to input the violation. Happens sometimes, he said, but his eyes suggested it had never happened before, and he hoped it would never happen again. I sit back down at my desk, the case file still open to that photograph of her laughing face. The image has faded since I first saw it, colors bleeding into sepia tones that make her look more like a memory than a person who once existed in the world. The flicker settles into the corner of the room, patient and persistent. I don't look directly at it, but I know it's there, waiting for something I can't name and might not be able to provide. Her brother stopped calling. The last message he left was brief, distracted. I think I understand now. Some questions aren't meant to have answers. Some people aren't meant to be found. The message was deleted before I could save it, wiped from the system by what the phone company called a routine maintenance error. But I remember his voice, the resignation in it, the sound of someone who had finally stopped fighting against the impossible. I close the case file, but I don't put it away. It sits on my desk like a presence, like something alive that requires attention even when it's not being actively observed. The pages rustle sometimes when there's no breeze, fall open to different photographs, different witness statements, different versions of the same unsolvable puzzle. The flicker grows stronger as daylight fades. It has more substance in the gathering darkness, more definition. Almost like a person standing just beyond the edge of sight, waiting for recognition that I'm not sure I'm ready to give. Because I'm beginning to understand that some cases don't end with arrests or trials or justice served. Some cases end with acceptance of mystery, with learning to live alongside questions that have no comfortable answers. And sometimes, late at night when the office is empty and the building settles into silence, I think I hear her voice in the static of the old radio on my bookshelf. Not words exactly, but the cadence of speech, the rhythm of someone trying to communicate across a distance that can't be measured in miles. The flicker moves closer to my desk. I still don't look at it directly, but I can feel its presence like warmth from a fire that throws no light. It wants something from me, needs something I might be able to provide. Understanding, maybe, or just acknowledgement that some disappearances are more complex than the simple binary of found or lost. I pick up my pen and write a single line at the bottom of the last report. Case remains open pending further developments. But I know there will be no further developments, not in any conventional sense. The flicker at the window, the voice in the static, the empty parking space that no one wants to fill, these aren't developments. They're something else entirely. The pen slips from my fingers, rolls across the desk, and falls to the floor with a sound like a small door closing. When I bend to retrieve it, the flicker is gone from the corner of my vision, but I can still feel its presence somewhere in the room, patient and eternal. I leave the pen where it fell and close the case file one final time. But I know I'll open it again tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day until I retire or transfer or simply stop coming to work altogether. Because some cases become part of you, woven into the fabric of your daily existence, until you can't remember what it felt like to not be searching for answers that might not exist. The flicker will return to the window tomorrow. I'll see it in my peripheral vision, feel it watching me as I read through the same witness statements and examine the same photographs and ask the same questions that have no satisfying answers. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the searching itself is the answer, the acknowledgement that some mysteries are meant to remain mysterious, some disappearances are meant to stay disappeared. I gather my things and prepare to leave the office, but I don't turn off the lights. The flicker seems more comfortable in the half-darkness, more willing to linger when it doesn't have to compete with harsh fluorescent illumination. Tomorrow I'll return to find the case file open again, turn to a page I didn't leave it on, marked with a fingerprint that doesn't match any in our database. And I'll continue the investigation that has no end, searching for a woman who might not want to be found, following clues that lead only to more questions. The flicker waits by the window as I leave, patient as stone, constant as shadow. It will be there when I return, and the day after that, and every day until I finally understand what it's trying to tell me. Or until I stop trying to understand and simply accept its presence as part of the landscape of unsolved mysteries that populate the corners of our vision and the edges of our certainty. Some cases are never closed. They just become part of the furniture of our lives, familiar and persistent and impossible to ignore. The flicker knows this. It has always known this. And now finally, so do I, story 6. I told them the night was quiet, devoid of any disturbances. They squinted at their notes, then moved to the next question, seemingly satisfied. But the tremor in the air had been palpable under the weight of something unsaid. The wind carried a metallic taste, raw and acrid as it filtered through the cracked window. Shadows danced in the lamplight, casting patterns that never settled. My hands felt cold, the kind of chill that doesn't leave even as the room warmed. And the floor creaked as if more than just echoes were walking through. The silence was filled with whispers I pretended not to hear. The coffee mug sits on the table, still warm. Steam rises in thin spirals, disappearing before reaching the ceiling. I watch it and wonder if she saw the same patterns when she held it last. Her fingers wrapped around the ceramic, thumbs positioned exactly where mine rest now. The handle bears a small chip near the base. I don't remember that being there before. They asked about routine, morning walks, evening rituals, the ordinary architecture of shared days. I described the path through the meadow, how she always stopped at the wooden bridge to watch the water move beneath. The way she counted her steps on the way back, lips moving silently. 47 from the bridge to the gate, always 47. But I didn't mention the notebook. The pages flutter when I turn them, filled with her careful handwriting, lists of things that don't make sense together, grocery items mixed with coordinates, phone numbers followed by sketches of birds. On the last written page, a single line, "He knows I've been watching." The basement smells different now, damp earth and something metallic like old pennies left in rain. I go down there when sleep won't come, which is most nights now. The concrete walls seem to absorb sound, creating a hollow quiet that feels almost sacred. In the corner behind the water heater, there's a loose brick. She showed me once, laughing about secret hiding places like we were children playing games. Inside the space, 3 photographs and a key I don't recognize. The photographs show places I've never been, empty parking lots under streetlights, a diner window with condensation running down the glass. The third one is just darkness, but if you hold it to the light, you can make out the shape of a car in the background, someone sitting in the driver's seat. I keep returning to that morning, the way she stood at the kitchen sink, shoulders rigid, staring out at nothing. When I asked what was wrong, she turned with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just thinking," she said, but her hands were shaking as she dried the same plate over and over. The detective with the tired eyes wants to know about her mood. Had she seemed anxious, depressed, different in any way? I tell him about the smile, the careful way she'd begun checking locks twice before bed. How she'd started taking different routes to the store, never the same path twice in a row. What I don't tell him is about the phone calls. They came at odd hours. When I answered, the line would go quiet for a moment before disconnecting. She said it was wrong numbers, telemarketers, nothing to worry about. But I caught her once, standing in the hallway with the phone pressed to her ear, listening to the silence on the other end. Her face was pale, concentrated, like she was trying to decode a message in the empty static. The key fits a locker at the bus station downtown. Inside, a manila envelope containing bank statements for an account I didn't know existed. Regular deposits, small amounts, always on the same day of the month. The account was opened 2 years ago. The address listed is a post office box in a town I've never heard of. Her sister calls to ask about the funeral arrangements. She mentions how secretive her sister had become lately, how she'd stopped returning calls. It was like she was living a completely different life, she says. The words echo in my head long after we hang up. I find myself retracing her steps. The path through the meadow feels different under my feet. The wooden bridge creaks in places it never used to. I count my steps on the way back. 49, I try again. 51, I can never make it come out to 47. The notebook pages reveal more when I study them under better light. Some of the writing has been erased and written over. Beneath the grocery lists, I can make out fragments of sentences. Followed me to the, and can't let him find, and something that might be the truth about what happened. The police found her car by the lake, keys still in the ignition. No signs of struggle, no note, just her purse on the passenger seat with everything intact except her phone. They're calling it suspicious circumstances, which seems like a careful way of saying they don't know what happened either. But I know about the second phone. Hidden in the same space as the photographs, wrapped in a plastic bag, the call history shows dozens of numbers I don't recognize, text messages that read like code, package delivered, meeting moved to usual place, he's getting suspicious. The usual place, I think about the photographs, the empty parking lots and late night diners, places where people meet when they don't want to be seen. Her laptop browser history tells a story I'm not sure I want to understand. Searches for missing persons, cold cases, unsolved disappearances. Forums where people discuss conspiracy theories and cover-ups. She'd bookmarked articles about witness protection, about how to disappear completely, about what happens to people who know too much. The metallic taste is back, stronger now. It coats my tongue when I wake up, lingers through morning coffee and afternoon tea. Sometimes I catch myself touching my lips, checking for blood that isn't there. They want to search the house again. The detective with tired eyes says it's routine, but his partner keeps looking at me like I'm a puzzle with missing pieces. I give them permission. Watch them move through rooms that still smell like her perfume, touching things that still hold the warmth of her presence. They don't find the basement hiding place. I don't mention it. The bank statements show the last deposit was made 3 days before she disappeared. I drive to the post office box address, but the building has been empty for months. Windows papered over, parking lot cracked and overgrown. The postal worker at the main branch has no record of the box number existing. Her car held one more secret, tucked under the spare tire, a voice recorder. Hours of conversations I wasn't meant to hear. Her voice tense and careful, talking to someone who never responds clearly enough for me to identify. I can't keep doing this, she says. He's starting to ask questions. A pause. No, he doesn't know anything yet, but if he finds out. The recording cuts off mid-sentence. I play it over and over, trying to catch details I might have missed. Background sounds, ambient noise, anything that might tell me where she was when she made it. But there's only her voice, growing more strained with each conversation, and the presence of someone else just beyond the microphone's reach. The photographs make more sense now. Surveillance photos, I think. Evidence of meetings, proof of contact, but evidence of what and proof for whom? The detective calls to say they're expanding the search area, dragging the lake, checking abandoned buildings, following up on reported sightings. He asks if I've remembered anything else, any detail that might help. I tell him no, that I've told them everything I can remember. The lie comes easily now. Because I'm starting to understand that she didn't disappear. She ran. The question is whether she ran from something or toward it, whether the fear in her voice on those recordings was for her safety or for mine. The house feels different with this knowledge. Corners seem deeper, shadows linger longer. I find myself checking the locks the way she used to, testing windows, listening for sounds that don't belong. The phone rings at odd hours, and when I answer, there's only silence. But it's not empty silence. It's the silence of someone listening, waiting, deciding. Her notebook has one more secret. The last page, seemingly blank, reveals writing when held up to heat. Numbers and letters in a pattern that looks like coordinates. I trace them on a map and find they point to a location about 50 miles north. A rest stop off a highway that leads to the state border. I know I should give this information to the police. I know I should hand over the photographs, the recordings, the evidence of a life I never knew she was living, but something stops me. Maybe it's the way she looked that last morning, the careful smile and shaking hands. Maybe it's the fear I heard in her voice, or the way she kept checking the locks. Or maybe it's because I'm starting to realize that I might be the one she was running from. The coordinates lead to a rest stop with a single picnic table and a view of empty fields stretching to the horizon. Taped to the underside of the table, another envelope. Inside, a letter in her handwriting. If you're reading this, then you found everything else. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you the truth. I'm sorry for what I had to do. But some secrets are too dangerous to share, and some people too dangerous to trust. The letter ends with coordinates for another location. I sit in my car as darkness falls, holding the paper in hands that shake the way hers used to. The metallic taste is so strong now I can barely swallow. In the rearview mirror, headlights appear and disappear, too far away to be sure if they're following or just traveling the same empty road. The second set of coordinates points to a place I recognize from the photographs. The parking lot under streetlights, the diner with condensation on the windows. I drive there as dawn breaks, expecting to find answers or closure or some final piece of the puzzle she left behind. Instead, I find her. She's sitting in the diner, coffee growing cold in front of her, watching the parking lot through glass that runs with morning condensation. When she sees me, her face doesn't show surprise, only a sadness so deep it seems to pull all the light from the room. You found everything, she says. It's not a question. I slide into the booth across from her, and we sit in silence that feels both familiar and strange. Outside, cars pass on the highway, people going about ordinary lives in an ordinary world. Inside, we exist in a space between truth and lies, between the life we shared and the life she's been living in secret. The phone calls, I say finally. She nods. They knew about you, about us, said they'd hurt you if I didn't cooperate. Cooperate with what? But even as I ask, I think I already know. The bank statements, the surveillance photos, the careful documentation of meetings and conversations. She was gathering evidence, building a case, preparing to expose something that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. I can't go back, she says. Not now, not ever. The detective with tired eyes will want to know why I didn't call immediately. Why I sat in that diner for 3 hours, drinking coffee that tasted like metal and listening to a story I'm not sure I believe. Why I let her walk away again, disappearing into a crowd of ordinary people living ordinary lives. I'll tell him I never found her, that the coordinates led to nothing, that the trail went cold in an empty parking lot under streetlights that flickered like dying stars. But sometimes, late at night when sleep won't come, I wonder if the story she told me was true, or if the woman I thought I knew was just another carefully constructed lie, another layer in a deception so deep I'll never find the bottom. The house still smells like her perfume, still holds the echo of her footsteps on floors that creak under the weight of secrets. The phone rings at odd hours, and when I answer, there's only silence. But now I listen to that silence differently, wondering if it's her voice I'm not hearing or someone else's. The metallic taste never goes away. Story 7. The tap dripped, though I hadn't turned it. Water pooled, slow and meek, its rhythm fractured, losing its confidence. The clock on the wall seemed to pause between seconds, the hands inching forward reluctantly, as if reconsidering their path. I had followed my morning routine with precision, yet the floor creaked a note higher, echoing strangely into corners that had always remained silent. the rug curled at the edge, a minor rebellion against my expectations. I bent to straighten it, but my fingers slipped over an unfamiliar surface. Beneath the fiber's indentations, circular and gentle, tracing a pattern I'd never left. The coffee cup. My coffee cup sat on the counter, ceramic white with that hairline crack running down the handle. I'd used this cup every morning for months, but today the crack seemed deeper, more pronounced. The coffee inside had cooled to room temperature, though I couldn't remember setting it down. Steam no longer rose from the surface, and a thin film had formed across the dark liquid. When I lifted it, the weight felt different, heavier somehow, as if the cup itself had absorbed something more than caffeine and morning ritual. The kitchen window. Sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, casting familiar rectangles across the linoleum. But the shadows fell at wrong angles, creating geometric shapes that didn't match the window frame above. I approached the glass and noticed fingerprints on the exterior surface, small ones, pressed against the pane from outside. My own hands, when I held them up for comparison, dwarfed these marks. The prints were positioned at eye level for someone much shorter than myself, someone who might have stood there watching, breathing against the glass until it fogged. The newspaper. The newspaper lay folded on the kitchen table, creased exactly down the middle. I always read the headlines first, but today my eyes went directly to the local section. An article about missing persons had been circled in blue ink, not my handwriting, the loops too careful, too deliberate. The pen that made these marks belonged to someone who took their time, who considered each letter before committing it to paper. I searched my drawers for a blue pen, but found only black and red ones, their tips dry from disuse. The refrigerator door. Photographs covered the refrigerator door, held in place by an assortment of magnets collected over the years, but someone had rearranged them. The picture of my graduation now sat beside one from a family gathering, creating an odd pairing that made me uncomfortable. In the corner, a new photograph had appeared, a landscape I didn't recognize, showing a small house with white shutters and a red door. The image quality suggested it was recent, taken with a digital camera, but I had no memory of printing it or placing it there. The hallway mirror. The hallway mirror reflected my image as I passed, but something in the background caught my attention. Behind my shoulder, barely visible in the reflection, stood a coat rack I didn't own. When I turned to look directly, I saw only the familiar wall with its faded paint and the small nail hole where I'd once hung a picture. But in the mirror, that coat rack remained, draped with a child's yellow raincoat that swayed slightly, as if someone had just brushed against it. The bedroom doorknob. The bedroom doorknob turned too easily under my hand, offering no resistance. I always kept this door closed, but now it stood slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of the room beyond. The brass knob felt warm to the touch, as if someone else had been turning it recently. When I examined it closely, I noticed scratches around the keyhole, fresh ones, bright against the aged metal. I didn't own a key to this door. I'd never needed one. The bed sheet. My bed had been made, corners tucked with military precision, but I never made my bed this way. My method was casual, functional. These sheets were pulled tight enough to bounce a coin, the pillows arranged with geometric exactness. The comforter bore the impression of someone sitting on the edge, a depression that suggested patient waiting. When I pressed my hand into the mattress, it felt cold, as if the warmth of human presence had long since dissipated. The closet light. Inside the closet, the overhead bulb cast harsh shadows between my hanging clothes, but the shadows moved independently of the swaying garments, creating shapes that resembled reaching hands or crouched figures. My clothes had been reorganized not dramatically, but subtly. Shirts hung in order by color, pants arranged by length, This methodical approach to organization felt foreign, imposed by someone who understood systems differently than I did. The shoebox. On the closet floor, a shoebox sat open, its contents spread in a careful display. Inside were items I recognized but had never owned: a child's drawing of a house with smoke curling from the chimney, a small wooden toy car with chipped red paint, and a photograph of adult hands holding smaller ones. The paper felt aged, yellowed at the edges, but the subjects in the photograph wore modern clothing. Someone had written a date on the back in that same careful blue ink, but the numbers made no sense in relation to my own timeline. The bathroom cabinet. The medicine cabinet mirror swung open at my touch, revealing shelves I thought I knew by heart. But among my usual toiletries sat a small glass bottle filled with what looked like sand. The label had been removed, leaving only adhesive residue and the ghost of text I couldn't make out. When I shook the bottle, the contents moved like liquid, not sand, and caught the light in ways that reminded me of crushed pearls or ground bone. The telephone. The kitchen telephone, an old rotary model I'd inherited, sat silent on its designated shelf. But the receiver felt warm when I lifted it, as if someone had been speaking into it moments before. When I held it to my ear, I heard not a dial tone, but the faint sound of breathing, slow, measured, patient. The breathing continued for several seconds before dissolving into the familiar electronic hum. The rotary dial bore smudges on specific numbers, 4, 7, and 2, worn from repeated use. The back door. The back door stood locked, deadbolt engaged, but the wood around the frame showed fresh scratches. Someone had attempted to use a key that didn't quite fit, gouging the metal as they worked. On the floor below the door, I found a small pile of wood shavings, curled and pale like fingernail clippings. The doormat had been moved slightly to the left, revealing a clean rectangle of concrete beneath evidence of someone lifting it to look underneath. The garden. Through the back window, I could see my small garden plot where I'd planted tomatoes and herbs in neat rows. But someone had been digging there, not destructively, carefully, methodically. Small holes appeared between the plants, each about the size of a child's fist, filled in but not completely. The soil in these spots was darker, richer, as if something organic had been buried and was now decomposing below the surface. The basement door. The basement door, painted white to match the kitchen walls, bore a new addition, a small lock I'd never installed. The lock was simple, the kind used on diaries or jewelry boxes, but it was engaged. When I examined it closely, I realized it wasn't meant to keep people out of the basement, it was designed to keep something in. The wood around the lock showed stress marks, as if pressure had been applied from the other side, pushing outward against the constraint. The photograph album. On the living room coffee table, a photo album lay open to a page I'd never seen before. The images showed my house from various angles, taken from positions that suggested the photographer had spent considerable time studying the property. Some photos were taken during daylight, others at dusk, and a few appeared to be shot through windows from inside the house. In one image, a shadow fell across the kitchen floor, human-shaped, but belonging to no one visible in the frame. The final detail. I returned to the kitchen as evening approached, drawn back to that dripping tap. But now the water fell in perfect rhythm, each drop identical in size and timing. On the counter beside the sink, someone had arranged 3 items in a precise line: a house key I didn't recognize, a child's drawing of a family with one figure crossed out in red crayon, and a note written in that careful blue handwriting. The note contained only an address, my own address, and below it, a single word that made my hands tremble as I read it: Home, Story 8. A faint chime drifted through the still air, soft yet persistent, like a forgotten bell tolling above an empty shop door. I hesitated, gripping the edge of the counter where traces of dust felt oddly comforting under my fingertips. The sound was misplaced here, in a room where light filtered unevenly through drawn curtains. Each note seemed to elongate, echoing in my mind with a clarity that didn't match its source. I glanced toward the entrance, expecting to find the old wooden frame, but only saw the closed door of the study. The bell rang out again, clear and resonant, pulling me into a moment unanchored from reality, a bridge to an event I couldn't clearly recall, but felt in the marrow of my bones. It was an invitation from someplace I shouldn't revisit, yet the ringing persisted. The dust beneath my fingers was warm. That detail struck me as wrong, though I couldn't say why. Dust should be cold, neutral, but this felt almost alive, as if recently disturbed by hands other than mine. I pulled my fingers away and studied the faint impressions they left behind, 5 pale streaks in the gray film that coated everything in this room. Everything except the bell. I turned toward the sound again, though it had stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than the chiming, pregnant with something I couldn't name. My eyes searched the shelves, the corners where shadows gathered like old secrets. There on the 3rd shelf from the bottom, between a stack of yellowed papers and a ceramic cup with a hairline crack, sat a small brass bell. Its surface caught what little light managed to penetrate the curtains, throwing back a dull gleam that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. Had it been there before, I couldn't remember looking directly at that shelf, yet something about its placement felt deliberate, staged, as if someone had positioned it precisely where I would eventually notice it when the moment was right. The moment for what? I reached for it, then stopped. My hand hovered in the air, trembling slightly. The memory came in fragments, like scattered photographs from a damaged album. A woman's voice speaking in measured tones. She always kept it on the windowsill. Said it helped her know when someone was coming up the path. But whose voice, and who was she talking about? I closed my eyes and tried to reconstruct the scene. There had been a kitchen, I thought, yellow walls or maybe cream, the kind of color that looks cheerful in morning light but turns sickly when clouds move in. A table with mismatched chairs. One of them had a wobbly leg that made a soft tapping sound whenever someone shifted their weight. The bell went missing the same day she did. That was a different voice, deeper, rougher around the edges. A man who cleared his throat before speaking, as if words were something he had to dig up from a deep place. Missing, the word echoed in my mind, taking on weight and dimension. Not lost, not misplaced. Missing implied intention, deliberation. Someone had taken it. But here it was, sitting on a shelf in this room that smelled of old paper, and something else, something organic and slightly sweet, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. I opened my eyes and looked at the bell again. It was smaller than I remembered, no bigger than a child's fist. The brass was tarnished in places, dark spots that looked almost like fingerprints. At its base, barely visible unless you knew to look for it, was an inscription. The letters were so worn I had to squint to make them out. For safe returns. My breath caught in my throat, safe returns. The phrase tugged at something buried deep in my memory, like a fishhook snagged on the bottom of a murky pond. I had heard those words before, spoken by someone whose face I couldn't quite recall. A woman with kind eyes and work-worn hands, standing in that yellow kitchen, holding the bell up to catch the light. My grandmother gave it to me, she had said, for safe returns. Silly, I know, but it makes me feel better when the weather turns bad. Weather, yes, there had been weather involved. Rain, I thought, or maybe snow. Something that made travel dangerous, that kept people indoors and made them worry about loved ones who hadn't come home when expected. but who hadn't come home. I found myself reaching for the bell again, drawn by an impulse I didn't fully understand. This time I didn't stop. My fingers closed around the cool metal, and immediately I felt a vibration, so faint it might have been my imagination. The bell didn't ring. I was holding the clapper still, but something resonated through the brass, a frequency just below the threshold of hearing. The room seemed to shift around me, shadows deepening in some places while others grew brighter. The curtains moved, though I felt no breeze. And in that movement, in the way the light changed and danced across the walls, I saw her. Not clearly, not like a photograph or a memory with sharp edges, more like an impression, a suggestion of presence. A woman standing by a window, her back to me, one hand pressed against the glass. She was waiting for something, someone. She used to stand there for hours, the first voice said, though now it seemed to come from very far away, especially after the arguments. Another fragment clicked into place, though the picture it revealed was still frustratingly incomplete. There had been raised voices, accusations, denials, a door slamming, footsteps on gravel growing fainter until they disappeared entirely. He always came back before, the woman by the window had said. Always. But this time was different. This time the bell had gone silent, and the waiting had stretched on until it became something else entirely. Something that felt less like hope and more like dread. I turned the bell over in my hands, studying its surface for clues I might have missed. The tarnish formed patterns that could have been random or could have been meaningful dark swirls that reminded me of water or smoke or the shadows cast by trees swaying in wind. Near the handle, almost hidden in the curve of the metal, I found something else, a small dent, as if the bell had been dropped or struck against something hard. Had it fallen, or had someone thrown it? The questions multiplied, each one spawning two more, until my mind felt like a maze with no center, no way out. I set the bell down on the counter and stepped back, suddenly dizzy. The room spun gently around me, and I had to grip the edge of the counter again to steady myself. That's when I noticed the notebook. It was lying open beside where I had placed the bell, though I was certain it hadn't been there before. The pages were yellowed and brittle, covered in handwriting that looked familiar but which I couldn't immediately place. The ink was faded in spots, as if water had been spilled across the paper and then allowed to dry. I leaned closer and began to read. Day 12, still no word. The neighbors are starting to talk. I can see it in their faces when they think I'm not looking. Mrs. Patterson brought soup again, that awful chicken thing she makes when someone dies. I wanted to tell her he's not dead, just delayed, but the words wouldn't come. The handwriting was careful, deliberate, but I could see places where the pen had pressed harder into the paper, where emotion had overcome control. Especially on certain words, delayed, dead, wouldn't. I flipped back a few pages looking for context. Day 7 found his jacket in the woods behind Miller's place. It was caught on a branch about 8 feet up, like he'd thrown it there or like the wind had carried it. But there wasn't any wind that night, was there? I keep trying to remember, but everything from that evening feels fuzzy, like looking through frosted glass. Miller's place, the name meant nothing to me, but something about it felt significant. I tried to picture woods, a jacket hanging from a branch like a scarecrow, but the image wouldn't come into focus. Day 3, the bell fell this morning. I was making coffee and heard it hit the floor in the other room. When I went to look, it was lying by the back door, even though I know I left it on the windowsill. I put it back, but it fell again an hour later, same spot, like it's trying to tell me something. I looked at the bell sitting on the counter beside me. Its surface seemed to shimmer in the uncertain light, and for a moment I could have sworn I saw my own reflection multiplied in its curves, dozens of tiny versions of myself, all looking back with expressions I couldn't read. The notebook drew my attention again. I flipped forward, past entries that detailed sleepless nights and unanswered phone calls, past descriptions of search parties and police interviews that led nowhere. The handwriting grew more erratic as the days passed, the careful script deteriorating into something desperate and wild. Day 26, I know what they're thinking. I can see it in their eyes, hear it in the spaces between their words. They think I did something. They think I know more than I'm telling. But how can I tell them about the dreams? How can I explain that every night I see him walking away from me, getting smaller and smaller until he disappears entirely? And in the dreams, I'm calling after him, but no sound comes out. I'm ringing the bell, ringing it as hard as I can, but it makes no noise. Dreams, the word sent a chill through me, because suddenly I realized I had been having dreams too. Not clear narratives with beginning, middle, and end, but impressions, feelings, fragments of sensation that clung to me when I woke. A man walking down a dirt road, the sound of gravel under boots, a door closing with finality. And always, somewhere in the background, the sound of a bell that rang and rang, but never seemed to call anyone home. I turned more pages, watching the entries grow shorter and more disconnected. Day 31, the bell is gone. That was all, just those 5 words, written in letters so faint they were barely visible. The next entry was different, written in a hand that looked steadier but somehow more defeated. Day 35, found it in the garden, buried under the roses, dirt packed around it like someone had planted it there on purpose. But who and why? I cleaned it off and brought it inside, but I can't bring myself to put it back on the windowsill. It sits on the kitchen table now, silent as a stone. I thought about the bell's current location, here on this dusty shelf, and wondered how many hands it had passed through, how many stories it had witnessed. Each owner adding their own layer of meaning, their own hopes and fears and disappointments. Day 40, I understand now. The bell doesn't ring for safe returns, it rings for departures. Every time someone left, really left, it would chime. Not when they went to the store or to work, but when they were going away for good. My grandmother knew, my mother knew, and now I know too. The words blurred in front of my eyes, and I realized my hands were shaking. I set the notebook down and stepped away from the counter, but the room felt smaller now, as if the walls had moved closer while I was reading. The air was thicker, harder to breathe. I needed to leave. The thought came suddenly and with surprising urgency. Whatever this place was, whatever story I had stumbled into, I didn't belong here. I was an intruder, reading someone else's private pain, handling objects that weren't meant for me. But as I turned toward the door, the bell chimed. Just once, soft and clear, though I hadn't touched it. The sound seemed to hang in the air longer than physics would allow, reverberating through the room and through my bones. And in that moment of suspended time, I finally remembered. I had been here before. Not in this exact room, but in the place this room represented. The kitchen with yellow walls, the woman standing by the window, the man who cleared his throat before speaking. I had been the one asking questions. The realization hit me like cold water, washing away the comfortable distance I had maintained between myself and the story. I wasn't just reading about someone else's tragedy. I was part of it, had been part of it all along. Can you tell me about the last time you saw him? My own voice, professional and careful, designed to elicit information without causing additional pain. I remembered the notepad in my hands, the pen that kept skipping, the way the woman's fingers trembled as she poured coffee I didn't want but accepted anyway. It was after dinner. We'd had words about money, about his job, about a dozen little things that seemed important at the time. He said he needed air, needed to think, said he'd be back before dark. Her voice had been steady then, controlled. It was only later, as the hours stretched into days and the days into weeks, that the careful composure had begun to crack. Did he take anything with him? Clothes, money, identification? Just his jacket, the brown one with the torn pocket. I kept meaning to fix it, but there was never time. The jacket they'd found hanging in the trees, 8 feet up, like something had carried it there, or like someone had thrown it, trying to make it look like an accident, like evidence of struggle or misadventure. But evidence of what exactly? I closed my eyes and tried to remember more, but the details remained frustratingly vague. There had been other interviews, other questions, other people who claimed to have seen him walking along the road that night, but their stories didn't match. One said he'd been heading toward town. Another swore he'd been walking in the opposite direction. A third insisted he'd been carrying something, a bag or a bundle, while a fourth said his hands had been empty. The kind of contradictions that usually meant people were trying too hard to be helpful, filling in gaps in their memory with what they thought they should have seen. But sometimes contradictions meant something else entirely. Sometimes they meant someone was lying. I opened my eyes and looked at the bell again. It sat motionless on the counter, but I could feel its presence like a weight in the room, a gravitational pull that made it hard to focus on anything else. The inscription at its base seemed to glow in the dim light, for safe returns. But what if safe returns weren't always possible? What if some departures were meant to be permanent? The notebook lay open beside the bell, and I found myself reading the final entry. Day 47, I think I know what happened. Not the details, maybe never the details, but the shape of it, the why of it. He didn't just leave. He couldn't just leave. Someone made sure of that. Someone who knew about the bell, who knew what it meant to me. They took it that night, buried it where I would find it, where I would understand. A message, a warning, or maybe just cruelty. The handwriting was different here, smaller and more cramped, as if the words had been written in secret, in fear of being discovered. I can't prove it, can't even say it out loud, but I know, and knowing is its own kind of prison. That was the last entry. The rest of the pages were blank, waiting for words that would never come. I closed the notebook and stood in the silence that followed. The room felt different now, charged with possibility and dread in equal measure. Every shadow could be hiding something. Every sound could be significant. The bell sat on the counter like a question mark, waiting for an answer I wasn't sure I wanted to give. But I picked it up anyway. This time, when my fingers closed around the brass, the vibration was stronger. Not quite a ring, but close. A tremor that seemed to originate not from the bell itself, but from somewhere deeper, some fundamental frequency that connected all things that had been lost and all people who had done the losing. And in that tremor, I heard voices. Not clearly, not like dialogue in a play or conversation in a restaurant, more like whispers at the edge of hearing, words that dissolved the moment I tried to focus on them. But the tone was unmistakable: fear, anger, desperation, guilt. Especially guilt. I set the bell down quickly and stepped back, but the voices continued. They seemed to be coming from the walls themselves, from the dust motes dancing in the filtered light, from the very air I was breathing. She knows. Impossible, there's no way she could know. The bell, she found the bell. So what, it's just a piece of brass, means nothing. You don't understand, it means everything. To her, it means everything. The voices faded, leaving behind only the sound of my own breathing and the rapid beating of my heart. I looked around the room, half expecting to see the speakers, but I was alone. As alone as I had been since entering this place, though now that solitude felt less like privacy and more like isolation. I needed to understand what I had stumbled into. More than that, I needed to understand my own role in it, because the more I remembered, the more certain I became that I hadn't just investigated this case. I had lived it, was living it still. The woman by the window, I could see her more clearly now, and the face that turned toward me was familiar in a way that made my chest tight. Not someone I had interviewed, someone I had known, someone I had cared about. Someone I had failed. The realization came slowly, like sunrise through fog. I hadn't been investigating a stranger's disappearance. I had been investigating my own life, my own choices, my own complicity in something that couldn't be undone. The man who had walked away that night, who had needed air and time to think, who had never come home, I knew him too. Knew the sound of his footsteps on gravel, the way he cleared his throat before speaking, the weight of his jacket in my hands when I pulled it down from that tree branch 8 feet up. I knew him because he was me. The thought should have been impossible, but it settled into my mind with the inevitability of truth. I was the one who had left. I was the one who had walked away from the yellow kitchen and the woman by the window and the promises I had made but couldn't keep. I was the one who had thrown my jacket into the trees, hoping it would look like evidence of something other than what it really was, a deliberate choice to disappear. But if that was true, then who was I now? I looked down at my hands, solid and real, and tried to reconcile them with the story taking shape in my mind. The dead don't investigate their own disappearances. The vanished don't return to read their own case files. The guilty don't get to observe their own crimes from a distance, safe and detached and righteously curious. Unless they do. Unless guilt is its own kind of haunting, and memory its own kind of purgatory. I picked up the bell again, and this time it rang clearly, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, from the past and the present and the space between them where truth lives, patient and implacable and utterly without mercy. In that ringing, I heard everything I had tried to forget, the arguments that had grown more frequent and more bitter, the promises broken and trust betrayed, the moment when leaving had seemed like the only solution, the only way to stop the pain I was causing and the pain I was feeling. I heard the sound of my own footsteps on gravel, walking away from the only person who had ever loved me enough to wait by a window with a bell in her hand, hoping for safe returns that would never come. I heard the silence that followed, stretching on until it became its own kind of presence, filling the spaces where words should have been, where explanations should have lived, where forgiveness might have grown if I had been brave enough to tend it. And I heard the sound of a woman crying, alone in a kitchen that would never be yellow enough to chase away the shadows I had left behind. The bell stopped ringing, but the echo continued, reverberating through the room and through my chest and through the years that had passed since that night when I had chosen disappearance over difficulty, absence over accountability. I set the bell down on the counter one final time and looked around the room that wasn't really a room, at the shadows that weren't really shadows, at the dust that felt warm under my fingers because it was made of all the moments I had abandoned. all the conversations I had refused to have, all the love I had walked away from because it was easier than staying to fight for it. The notebook lay open beside the bell, and I realized now that the handwriting I had recognized was my own. Not from the entries I had read, but from the margins, from the notes I had made while trying to solve a mystery that had no solution because it wasn't really a mystery at all. Just a choice, just a man who had walked away and a woman who had waited, and a bell that had rung once for departure and then fallen silent forever. I reached for the pen that lay beside the notebook and began to write. Day one, I remember now, I remember everything. The sound of gravel under my boots, the weight of her eyes on my back as I walked away, the bell ringing once, just once, as I reached the end of the path. I told myself it was for safe returns, that it meant I would come back when I was ready, when I had figured out how to be the person she deserved. But bells don't ring for intentions, they ring for truth. And the truth was that I was leaving for good, even if I couldn't admit it to myself at the time. The words flowed onto the page like water finding its level, like secrets finally allowed to surface. I wrote about the jacket I had thrown into the trees, hoping to create confusion, to make my disappearance look like something that had happened to me rather than something I had chosen. I wrote about the months that followed, the years of telling myself I had done the right thing, the only thing, even as the memory of her face by the window ate away at me like acid. I wrote about the bell I had taken with me, not as a trophy but as a punishment, a reminder of what I had given up and what I had destroyed. How I had buried it in gardens and thrown it in rivers and left it on shelves in empty rooms, but it always found its way back to me, always returned to ring its single, accusatory note. And I wrote about this room, this place that existed somewhere between memory and guilt, where the disappeared come to confront their own disappearance, where the lost try to find themselves in the wreckage they left behind. I don't know if she's still waiting, I wrote. I don't know if she ever forgave me, or if forgiveness is even possible for something like this. But I know the bell rings for departures, not returns, and I know that some doors once closed can never be opened again. I set down the pen and looked at the words I had written. They seemed to glow on the page, as if lit from within by their own truth. Around me, the room began to change, the shadows deepening, the light growing dimmer, the walls becoming less solid and more suggestion. The bell sat on the counter, silent now, its purpose served. It had brought me here to this moment of recognition, this acknowledgement of what I had done and what I had lost. It had rung for my departure all those years ago, and now it was silent for my understanding. I reached out and touched it one last time, feeling the cool brass under my fingertips, the weight of all the safe returns it had witnessed and all the departures it had marked. Then I turned and walked toward the door, which was no longer the door to the study, but something else entirely, something that led not to another room, but to the space beyond rooms, beyond memory, beyond the reach of bells and their insistent, truthful ringing. Behind me, the chiming started again, soft and persistent, like a forgotten bell tolling above an empty shop door. But this time I didn't stop to listen. This time I kept walking, carrying with me the knowledge of what I had done and what I had lost, and the understanding that some sounds once heard echo forever in the chambers of the heart. The bell rang once more, clear and final, and then there was only silence, stretching out like a road with no end, like a path that leads away from everything you've ever loved and never, ever leads back home. Story 9. I assured them that I hadn't heard a thing. The words slipped out smoothly, almost rehearsed, as if the truth had never vibrated through my eardrums. Outside, the leaves rustled with secrets, barely audible over the hum of distant traffic. The air was thick with the metallic scent of rain, imminent yet withheld, lingering like an unsaid confession. My fingers trembled slightly, brushing against the rough fabric of my coat pocket where the ticket stub still lay folded. A creaking floorboard behind me sent a shiver across my spine, a silent witness to my deception. But the ringing persisted, echoing in my mind long after the voices had left. The grandfather clock in the hallway had stopped at 11:47. Its brass pendulum hung motionless behind the glass, catching fragments of light from the overhead fixture. I remember winding it every Sunday morning, the key turning with a satisfying click, the mechanism responding with renewed purpose. Now it stood silent, a monument to interrupted routine. The wood grain around its base showed water stains, circular marks where someone had placed wet glasses without coasters. She always complained about that habit, how it would ruin the finish. The clock face bore a hairline crack across the number 6, so thin it was barely visible unless the light struck it just right. The photograph on the mantelpiece showed us at the lake house, arms draped casually around each other's shoulders. My smile looks forced now, though I remember feeling genuinely happy that afternoon. The frame is silver-plated, tarnished at the edges where fingers have gripped it over the years. In the background of the image, a small boat drifts unmanned across dark water. I never noticed that detail before, how empty the vessel appeared, how it seemed to float without purpose or direction. The glass covering the photo has a smudge in the lower right corner, a thumbprint that catches the light and distorts part of the shoreline. Her coffee cup still sits on the kitchen counter, lipstick staining the rim in a perfect crescent moon. The ceramic is bone white with tiny blue flowers painted around the handle. Steam no longer rises from the surface, but the liquid inside has formed a thin skin, like a membrane protecting secrets beneath. I remember buying this set at the antique shop downtown, how she ran her fingers along each piece, testing for chips or imperfections. The saucer underneath is slightly askew, as if the cup had been set down in haste. A single drop of coffee has dried into a brown stain on the granite countertop. The basement door stands ajar, revealing only darkness beyond the first 3 wooden steps. The brass doorknob feels cold against my palm, worn smooth by countless hands. From below comes the faint scent of dampness and old newspapers, the smell of forgotten storage. The light switch at the top of the stairs has been painted over so many times that the toggle barely moves. I remember descending those steps countless times, carrying boxes of seasonal decorations, winter coats, books we never read but couldn't bear to discard. The handrail wobbles slightly under pressure, loose screws that I kept meaning to tighten. Her perfume lingers in the bedroom, a ghost of jasmine and vanilla that seems strongest near the closet. The bottle sits on the dresser, its crystal surface reflecting fractured light across the wall. The atomizer creates a fine mist when pressed, though I notice the level has dropped since yesterday. The scent mingles with the smell of cedar from the jewelry box beside it, a rectangular container with a ballerina that no longer spins. Inside, earrings and necklaces lie tangled together like sleeping serpents. The mirror above the dresser shows my reflection, but also the rumpled bedsheets behind me, covers thrown back as if someone had risen quickly. The telephone receiver feels heavier than it should, the coiled cord stretched taut from being pulled across the kitchen table. The rotary dial spins with mechanical precision, each number clicking into place with satisfying certainty. But the line produces only static now white noise that could hide whispered conversations or distant screams. The phone book lies open beside it, pages yellowed and soft from handling. Someone has circled several numbers in red ink, though I don't remember making those marks. The pen used lies uncapped nearby, its tip dried to a dark crimson point. Rain begins to tap against the living room window, each droplet creating tiny rivers that race toward the sill. The glass is old, with subtle imperfections that bend the view of the garden beyond. Through the distortion, the rose bushes appear to sway without wind, their thorns catching what little light penetrates the clouds. The window frame needs painting. White chips have fallen to the sill, creating a small pile of neglect. A spider has built its web in the upper corner, though I see no spider, only the intricate pattern of its abandoned architecture. The leather armchair holds the impression of a body, cushions permanently molded to familiar contours. The fabric has worn thin at the armrests, revealing the stuffing beneath like exposed bone. A book lies open on the side table, its pages yellowed and brittle. The bookmark, a pressed flower between clear plastic, marks a passage about memory and its unreliable nature. Reading glasses rest atop the open pages, their lenses smudged with fingerprints. The lamp beside the chair casts a warm circle of light, but shadows gather at its edges like curious observers. The kitchen faucet drips with metronomic persistence, each drop striking the stainless steel sink with a tiny bell-like chime. The sound echoes off the tile backsplash, creating a rhythm that matches my heartbeat. Beneath the sink, the cabinet door hangs slightly open, revealing cleaning supplies arranged in neat rows. The smell of bleach mingles with the lingering aroma of last night's dinner, creating an unsettling chemical sweetness. A dish towel hangs from the oven handle, its cheerful yellow pattern at odds with the growing darkness outside. The car keys rest on the hall table, their metal surface cold and familiar. The keychain bears a small charm, a lighthouse that once seemed symbolic of guidance and safety. Now it feels ominous, a warning of dangerous shores and hidden rocks. The car outside sits in the driveway, its windshield fogged with condensation. Through the mist, I can barely make out the interior, the passenger seat that someone occupied just hours ago. The garage door opener clips to the sun visor, its red light blinking like a mechanical heartbeat. Upstairs, the floorboards creak under my weight, each step producing a different note in a discordant symphony. The hallway stretches longer than I remember, shadows pooling in doorways like dark water. Family photos line the walls, faces smiling from behind glass barriers. In several images, someone has been carefully cut out, leaving only empty spaces where a person once stood. The scissors used for this task lie on the hall table, their blades reflecting the overhead light like silver teeth. The bathroom mirror shows my reflection, but also something else, a movement in the shower behind me that might be steam or might be something more substantial. The medicine cabinet stands open, revealing bottles of pills with names I don't recognize. Someone has been taking medication I knew nothing about, treating conditions that were never discussed. The toothbrush holder contains only one brush now, though I distinctly remember there being two yesterday morning. Water spots on the mirror create a constellation of imperfections, each one distorting a different part of my face. The answering machine blinks insistently, its red light pulsing like a tiny heart. The counter shows 7 messages, though I remember checking it this morning and finding it empty. The tape inside whirs softly when I press play, but the voices are distorted underwater sounds that might be words or might be something else entirely. Between the messages, I hear breathing, long pauses filled with the sound of someone waiting, listening, deciding whether to speak. The machine's cord has been unplugged and plugged back in, the connection loose enough to create intermittent static. The fireplace holds cold ashes, gray powder that stirs when I breathe near it. Among the debris I find fragments of paper, edges curled and blackened but still bearing traces of handwriting. The words are illegible now, consumed by flames that burned while I slept or while I was away. The poker leans against the brick hearth, its iron surface still warm to the touch. Above the mantel, a painting shows a peaceful countryside scene, but the colors have darkened with age, transforming the pastoral landscape into something more ominous. Her jewelry box plays a tinkling melody when opened, the ballerina frozen mid-pirouette. Inside, compartments hold treasures and secrets, rings that catch the light and necklaces that seem to move of their own accord. A locket contains a photograph I've never seen before, a face that looks familiar but belongs to no one I can name. The velvet lining has worn thin in places, revealing the wood beneath like exposed flesh. At the bottom of the box, beneath the removable tray, I find a key that fits no lock I know. The garden hose coils in the backyard like a sleeping snake, its green length disappearing into the shadows beside the garage. Water still drips from the nozzle, though I don't remember using it recently. The spray pattern selector is set to mist, creating a fine cloud that disperses quickly in the evening air. Beneath the spigot, mud has formed where water has pooled and dried repeatedly. The ground here is softer than elsewhere, as if it has been disturbed and then carefully smoothed over. The ringing in my ears grows louder as night approaches, a high-pitched whine that drowns out the normal sounds of evening. It started after the conversation with the officers, after I assured them of my ignorance. The sound seems to come from inside my skull, vibrating through bone and tissue like a tuning fork struck against hard surface. Sometimes it forms patterns, almost like Morse code, dots and dashes that might spell out messages I'm not ready to receive. The silence between the rings feels pregnant with possibility, heavy with unspoken truths that hover just beyond comprehension. Story 10. The red hand of the clock ticked back before lurching forward, as if caught in a time it didn't belong. My footsteps felt echoed, each one whispering slightly ahead of where I was. The window I closed last night was open again, its curtain fluttering like a slow heartbeat. The mug on the counter, left untouched, now faced the wrong direction. I retraced steps I couldn't remember taking. The floor creaked without my weight, and in the mirror my reflection lagged, a beat behind reality, watching. The coffee mug asterisk. The ceramic surface bears no fingerprints except mine, yet it sits rotated 90 degrees from where I left it. The handle pointed toward the sink when I went to bed. Now it faces the hallway, as if someone sat across from where I usually stand and turned it naturally toward themselves. The coffee inside has grown cold, but not the particular cold of overnight abandonment. This feels like the chill of recent neglect, as if warmth fled only hours ago. I run my finger along the rim and find it completely dry, though I distinctly remember leaving a few drops of cream floating on the surface. The kitchen window. The latch shows no signs of tampering, yet the glass panel sits slightly ajar. I sealed it tight before retiring, checking twice because the forecast promised rain. The curtain fabric holds no moisture, despite the storm that passed through. Instead, it moves with an indoor breeze I cannot locate. When I press my palm against the screen, it gives slightly, as if recently pushed from outside. But the flower boxes beneath show no disturbance, no footprints in the soft soil that yesterday's rain should have made receptive to even the lightest touch. The hallway mirror. My reflection appears normal now, synchronized with my movements, but the memory of that lag persists like an aftertaste. The mirror hangs exactly where it always has, secured by the same two hooks I installed myself. Yet something in the angle seems different, as if it had been removed and rehung by someone who measured with their eyes rather than a level. The silvering shows no new scratches or smudges, but when I breathe close to the surface, my condensation mingles with patterns already there, ghostly fingerprints that could be mine from any previous morning. The floorboards. Each creak has its own voice, and I know them all like old friends. The third board from the kitchen doorway groans under pressure. The one near the bookshelf whistles slightly when stepped on just right. But this morning I heard the song of the seventh board, the one that protests only under weight distributed differently than mine. Someone either much heavier or much lighter crossed that spot. The wood grain shows no scuff marks, no evidence of unfamiliar shoes, yet the sound echoes in my memory with perfect clarity. The bookshelf. 3 volumes sit spine out when they should be spine in. I have a habit, perhaps obsessive, of shelving certain books backward to break the monotony of text. These 3 were among them yesterday. Now they face outward, their titles visible, as if someone needed to read them quickly or wanted me to notice which ones they had touched. The subjects seem random: a guide to local flora, a collection of short mysteries, and a manual about home security systems. The dust patterns on the shelf suggest they were recently moved and carefully replaced. The armchair. The indentation in the cushion does not match my usual sitting pattern. I favor the left side, leaving a depression that has become permanent over months of evening reading. This morning, the right side bears the mark of recent occupation. The fabric holds a scent that is not quite unfamiliar but not quite mine either, something like the smell of my own clothes after they have been stored too long in a drawer. When I sit in my usual spot, the chair feels unbalanced, as if it remembers a different weight distribution. The telephone. The handset rests in its cradle, but the cord shows a slight twist that was not there before. I am particular about keeping it straight, unwinding it weakly to prevent tangles. Someone lifted the receiver recently, held a conversation, and replaced it with less care than I would have used. The redial button reveals the last number called, and it is mine. Someone in this house called this house while I slept. The call log shows a duration of 43 seconds, long enough for several rings and a brief exchange, or perhaps just long enough for someone to listen to the sound of their own voice on my answering machine. The bedroom door. I sleep with it closed, a habit formed in childhood and never abandoned. This morning it stands ajar by perhaps 6 inches, enough for someone to observe without fully entering. The hinges are well-oiled and silent, so I would not have heard it opening. But I am a light sleeper, sensitive to changes in air circulation and ambient sound. An open door would have altered the room's acoustics enough to disturb my rest, yet I slept deeply and dreamlessly. The door handle shows the faintest smudge at an unusual height, either from someone much shorter than me, or from someone reaching awkwardly from the hallway side. The bed sheet. My side of the bed bears the expected wrinkles and warmth of recent occupation, but the other side, which should be smooth and undisturbed, shows subtle signs of pressure. Not the deep creases of someone sleeping, but the lighter impressions of someone sitting or lying briefly on top of the covers. The pillow on that side holds a slight depression, as if a head rested there just long enough to leave a memory in the foam. When I lift it to my face, I smell something that might be my own shampoo, but with an undertone I cannot identify. The bathroom medicine cabinet asterisk. The mirror door hangs slightly open, though I never leave it that way. Inside, my medications sit in their usual order, but the aspirin bottle has been moved to the front. I keep it behind the vitamins, out of easy reach to prevent casual overuse. The bottle feels lighter than it should, though I cannot remember when I last counted the contents. The safety cap shows fresh scratches around the edges, the kind left by fingers less familiar with its particular mechanism. In the mirror's reflection, I notice that my own face looks tired in a way that 8 hours of sleep should have erased. The kitchen faucet asterisk. A single drop of water clings to the spout, catching the morning light like a tiny lens. I always ensure the faucet is completely dry before leaving the kitchen, wiping away any residual moisture with a dish towel. This drop is perfectly formed, too round and clear to be the result of condensation or a slow leak. Someone used this faucet recently, carefully, quietly, and with enough presence of mind to turn it off completely, but not enough time to dry it thoroughly. The handles show no water spots, suggesting whoever used it was familiar enough with my habits to clean up afterward. The back door. The deadbolt remains locked, the chain still in place, but the doormat on the outside sits askew. From the kitchen window, I can see it lies at an angle that suggests someone stood on it recently, shifting their weight while waiting or listening. The door itself shows no scratches around the lock, no signs of tampering, yet something about its position seems wrong. It sits more firmly in its frame than usual, as if it has been carefully closed rather than simply shut. The weather stripping along the bottom edge holds a few blades of grass that are still green, too fresh to have been there since yesterday. The living room lamp. The lampshade has been rotated, changing the direction of its seam from facing the wall to facing the room. I am particular about such details, preferring clean sight lines and hidden imperfections. The rotation is subtle, perhaps 30 degrees, but enough to alter the quality of light it casts. The bulb itself seems dimmer than it should be, though it is the same wattage I always use. When I turn it off and on again, it flickers momentarily, as if the connection has been recently disturbed. The switch shows a fingerprint that overlaps with mine, but extends beyond it, suggesting a larger hand or a different grip. The newspaper. It lies folded on the side table, open to a page I did not read yesterday. The crease marks show it was refolded after being fully opened, but my habit is to read it section by section without ever spreading it completely flat. The page displayed contains an article about missing persons, a subject that would not normally draw my attention. Someone wanted me to see this particular story, or perhaps they were reading it themselves and forgot to return the paper to its original state. The newsprint shows no additional fingerprints, but the margins bear tiny indentations, as if someone pressed a pen or pencil there while reading, though no marks are visible. The refrigerator. The door handle feels different under my palm, slightly sticky in a way that suggests recent cleaning with an unfamiliar product. I use only warm water and vinegar, which leaves no residue. This tackiness feels like the aftermath of commercial cleaning spray, applied hastily and not completely wiped away. Inside, my food sits exactly where I left it, but the milk carton has been moved to the front of the top shelf. I always keep it on the door within easy reach for morning coffee. The carton feels lighter than yesterday, though I remember using only a small amount. When I shake it gently, the liquid sounds different, thinner somehow. The clock on the wall asterisk. Its red hand continues to move erratically, sometimes smoothly, sometimes in small jumps backward before resuming forward motion. I have owned this clock for years and never seen it behave this way. The battery compartment shows no signs of tampering, and the hands are not loose or damaged. Yet it seems to be keeping its own version of time, running perhaps 10 minutes slow despite being accurate yesterday. The ticking sound has changed too, becoming slightly hollow, as if the internal mechanism has been subtly altered. When I hold my ear close to it, I hear what might be a second, fainter ticking, like an echo or a shadow of the primary rhythm. The window curtains. They hang differently now, with uneven folds that suggest they were recently drawn shut and then reopened by unfamiliar hands. My method of opening them creates a specific pattern of pleats, practiced over months of morning routine. These folds are similar but not identical, like a signature forged by someone who had studied the original but could not perfectly replicate the pressure and timing. The fabric holds a scent that is almost floral, but not from any detergent or fabric softener I use. It reminds me of something from childhood, a perfume or soap that I cannot quite place, but that fills me with an inexplicable sense of unease. My own hands. I examine them as if they belong to someone else, looking for evidence of activities I cannot remember. The fingernails are clean, but under the right index nail I find a tiny sliver of something dark. It could be soil or chocolate or dried blood, though I remember no gardening, no midnight snacking, no injuries. My palms show no unusual calluses or scratches, but they feel different somehow, as if they have been used for unfamiliar tasks while I slept. When I make a fist, the muscles respond with a slight stiffness, the kind that comes from gripping something tightly for an extended period. I cannot remember what I might have held so firmly or why. The final mirror. Standing before the hallway mirror once more, I search my reflection for answers it cannot provide. My face looks like my face, my eyes like my eyes, but something in the expression seems foreign. It is as if I am looking at a photograph of myself taken by someone else, capturing an angle or moment I would not have chosen. The reflection moves with perfect synchronization now, but I find myself testing it, raising my hand suddenly or tilting my head to catch it off guard. Behind my reflected image, the hallway stretches backward, and for just a moment I think I see a shadow that does not correspond to anything in the actual space behind me. When I turn to look directly, nothing is there but empty air and familiar walls, yet the feeling of being observed persists, as if the mirror holds memories of what it has witnessed while I was not looking.